There have been multiple societies that abolished slavery many thousands of years prior to the U.S. There was a dynasty in China in the BC era that abolished slavery for a time period. There was a leader in India for a period of a couple hundred years where slavery was abolished. There were Stoics in Greece that were abolitionists.
No, there weren't. There weren't any Stoics.
There actually was. Seneca.
Epic. No, he did not say slavery should be abolished. No.
Seneca.
Epictetus was, for example, an early slave.
Seneca absolutely advocated for getting rid of slavery, said it was an immoral institution. He
said it was immoral. He didn't say it should go away. There
was quite a few Stoics that agreed with him.
They agreed slavery was bad, but they didn't call for abolition. The first person that called for the abolition of slavery, Gregory of Nyssa.
That is wrong.
No, Gregory of Nyssa is the first person.
He's the first Christian that talked about abolishing slavery, but he was outruled by the other church fathers.
Exactly.
The other church fathers disagreed with him.
But no, he's the first person in history to call for the abolition.
So he certainly is not the first person in history. In fact, I already quoted you. There's I think the Wing dynasty in China, and then there's another dynasty in India that abolished it.
No,
way
I'm talking
before
about universal abolition. That
was universally abolitioned.
I have a fact check. Seneca did not explicitly advocate for abolishing slavery. While he criticized the mistreatment of slaves and encouraged humane treatment, he accepted slavery as a social institution. The sources for this are Moral Letters to Lucilius, letter 47, and Seneca De Beneficiis, book 3, chapter 18. And then there is a book in 1994 discussing Rome's attitudes towards slavery called Bradley Keith's Slavery Society in Rome.
Would he have been Seneca have been executed if he'd called for the abolition of it?
I don't think he would have been executed. It's just Kyle Harper talks about this in his book. It's just no one even questioned it. It's like trying to say, could we get rid of water
or money?
Yeah, they just knew that this was just something that could never go away.
Money's a really good example. I think people need to understand when we talk about slavery in the United States, most people they envision a black man in a field being beaten by a slave owner, and they don't realize how pervasive and widespread the institution of slavery was beyond farming and in the South. There were cobblers, black men who were trained to make shoes, who worked in cities and ran shoe stores where they transacted. But slavery meant that they had no legal rights. That means there was a person who owned them, and they wanted them to do this job. There's also an important factor in that they were, depending on what the slave owner or the slave master wanted, they could make money for themselves. And in fact, Frederick Douglass bought his own freedom and then later bought the freedom of his wife and his child. It shouldn't have happened that way.
No.
But, and obviously slavery is bad. The reason I bring this up is, I kind of lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Slavery was viewed as exactly as we would view something like money, an economic institution that exists and is a function of government. And then slowly over time, sentiments towards it started to shift in the direction, and it ended up with a very bloody war in the United States. Now, for other, like the UK, they basically said, we're ending slavery, and then we're going to have to pay back everybody for taking their slaves away from them. They did a big debt, and then they ended up paying. It took, I don't know, it took them like 100 years to pay off the debt.
It took a good 100 years. It started early with like Anabaptists and Methodists working together, and eventually they started to get legislation passed. They got rid of the slave trade in some new territories under William Penn, and then shortly after they abolished the slave trade throughout the British Empire, and then a couple decades later they emancipated slaves. So it was a slow process.
We'll shift a little bit. Now I'll jump to my good friend Bill Maher. All right, go for it.
Before you get too far, the emperor that abolished slavery in China was not Wing, it was Wang. I apologize for that. And that was in the first century. In India, hundreds of years before that, there was Ashoka who abolished slavery. Now, it came back years later, but early abolitionists existed throughout the world.
So I want to shift to our good friend Bill Maher. Not really a good friend, but he's not that bad. He's all right. Obviously, he made that documentary, Religulous, and he goes around challenging people's views and things as such, and that's always okay. The reason I bring him up is that Dennis Prager made a good example. He has a good example of moral tradition and where you go when you destroy it. And he calls it, I always get it wrong, cut stem politics, something like this, where he basically says you have the root of a society, which in his view is the Judeo-Christian moral tradition. He's Jewish, obviously. And it grows into this beautiful flower that someone then cuts from the stem and holds up in the air and shows everyone how beautiful it is. But you know that once it's cut from its roots, it will eventually start to die. And that's where we're at right now. You can hold up this beautiful American society, but as in his view, Judeo-Christian values wane, it eventually is going to die. I think it's a really good point. I think what we're seeing now with the future the current generations and their movement dramatically away from I mean, to be honest, any kind of moral tradition, though I don't think all moral traditions are good. There are some that are in the East that they chop your hands off and things like that I'm not a fan of. But the moral tradition we have in this country about honoring your parents, about not stealing, not killing, is slowly disappearing. And I would say largely built in the Ten Commandments. And what we're getting in its wake is people who fear nothing, care for nothing. We're getting these people are ramming cars into department stores in Chicago. It's happened so many times that they've put up barriers in front of in Mag Mile. My friends who live in Chicago are like, you can't even go there anymore. A 13-year-old kid pulled out a gun, started shooting people in a shopping district. How is this happening? Well, you've ripped people from any kind of moral tradition, any kind of social fear or cultural consequence, or for many people, any kind of spiritual consequence.
I find that a lot of the great things from Christianity, we've learned them, and then now you're supposed to so you learn a great piece of information from a seminar somewhere. You take that information, you integrate it into your life, you create books, you create empires with that information in it, and then that information is redistributed. That doesn't mean everyone needs to go to that seminar you went to 30 years ago where you learned this. So people that are obsessed with this book and worshiping some dude is like, bro, good luck trying to get half the world to worship a guy. It's insane. We shouldn't be worshiping each other, first of all.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, so subscribe and come hang out.